Hello, students. I'm going to be talking about poetry. Do a little video introduction. I know poetry frightens a lot of people. I hope you guys can get over your initial queasiness if you have it. I'm going to direct you guys to a PowerPoint presentation. It's in the course documents section, and it basically just has the text of what I'm going to be reading off of. And yeah, if it looks a little strange because my eyes are not on the screen or not looking at the camera, it's because they're looking at the screen that's just above the camera. Okay, so I just want to introduce poetry with a few quotations that I think can give you a sense of how prominent poets have thought about poetry. And so we have a very famous one by William Wordsworth. He was a romantic poet, and his years are 1770 to 1850, I do believe. And so, yeah, so and one of the most famous poets of the 19th century. And he wrote that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It takes its origin from emotion recollected in tranquility. Now, so this idea of poetry being this spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. Now, a lot of people have criticized Wordsworth by mentioning that his notebooks were very far from appearing spontaneous. There's a lot of, scratch through a lot of drafts and so on. But I think if you really consider the second part of it, it takes its origin from emotion recollected in tranquility. So it has this kind of initial spark that's spontaneous, and then it's recollected later, and it has to be in this sort of moment of tranquility, this serenity where you can kind of look at emotion in a more, I guess, have more of a context for it and a more of a, less heightened kind of reaction to the emotion. Wordsworth's colleague Samuel Taylor Coleridge wrote, "I wish our clever young poets would remember my homely definitions of prose and poetry. That is, prose, words in their best order; poetry, the best words in their best order." So yeah, you can see his distinction between poetry and prose was that poetry, they're the best words in their best order. And so it's kind of maybe seems to be a minor distinction, but yeah, that's definitely how some people think of it. The best words in their best order. Okay, now Robert Frost. This is a particularly it might be a little bit strange definition of poetry or description of what a poem does. So a poem, quote, and now I'm in Robert Frost's voice, though I won't try to get his Vermont accent. A poem begins in light and ends in wisdom. It begins in delight. It inclines to the impulse. It assumes direction with the first line laid down. It runs a course of lucky event and ends in a clarification of life. Not necessarily a great clarification, but in a momentary stay against confusion. It ends with some final phrase at once wise and sad. And I know that it's impossible to have one description that fits all poems. And I think it's just, and this is, of course, it's taken out of context. And I'm not even sure what poems he was attaching this definition to. Because if you look at a lot of his poems, they end with questions. So is he really clarifying anything, or is he just kind of isolating a quandary that his poem has, kind of identified but hasn't, explained? And I think a lot of poets don't really feel it's their job to explain the world to us. Maybe just kind of capturing some aspect of the world. So let me continue with this poets on poetry. And this is Emily Dickinson, and this is from a poem. If you see the PowerPoint presentation, you'll see that it's got the line breaks like a poem would. Also, she has an interesting way of capitalizing. She has it's an idiosyncratic way of capitalizing words. And also she uses a lot of dashes. Okay, so Emily Dickinson. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies. Too bright for our infirm delight, the truth's superb surprise. As lightning to the children eased, with explanation kind. The truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind. And I have the entire poem there. It's a short poem, but the first couple lines I think are a little bit more indicative of what Emily Dickinson's idea of poetry is about. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies. Success in circuit lies means success in going around, a circuit being a circle, going around rather than being straight with a person. Saying it directly, that she thinks that success is in saying things indirectly, and that causes a lot of annoyance with a lot of students. A lot of students want things very certain, and they're very frustrated at poets who just can't get around to giving us the straight deal. They just have to hem and haw and hint about things. But I think she has a pretty good point that sometimes it is better not to say something straightforwardly, to again infer things. And I think what happens, or imply things. Sorry, I think what happens is it calls on the reader to make those kind of to draw conclusions and to attach a poem to their own lives and things like that. If you're too straightforward, you basically, it's hard to analyze something that's too straightforward, and maybe it's a little less interesting to the reader because of that. Now, Yusef Komunyakaa has got a great poem that I'll read later. This is called Facing It. But this, his description of poetry is a kind of distilled insinuation. It's a way of expanding and talking around an idea or a question. Sometimes more actually gets said through such a technique than a full frontal assault. And I think he's really talking about some of the same things Emily Dickinson's talking about. I like this. Poetry is a kind of distilled insinuation. Distilled means it's basically been boiled down to bare minimum, saying as much as you can through as few words as possible, insinuating rather than saying it outright, insinuating, saying it indirectly. So anyway, that's Yusef Komunyakaa's description.